What's up? Welcome back to Nostalgia. Dave here in our podcast, What's Going On in Pop Culture Right Now. Another solid, packed episode for late summer. Pretty happy with what we got to talk about this week. On the movie side, we have Caught Stealing from Darren Aronofsky, the new The War of the Roses remake, The Roses, catching up on some music from Kaytranada and Bryson Tiller, and then two, to me, really exciting new movies, Dead to Rights from China, and Highest to Lowest from Spike Lee, his Kurosawa remake. So make sure you subscribe, youtube.com/nostalgiapod, linktree.com/nostalgiapod. See links below. Get the best of 2025 Spotify playlist linked below. Let me know it's good, and let's get into it. What's up? Welcome back to Nostalgia. Dave here with a review of Bryson Tiller's fifth album, Part 1, The Vices. His upcoming fifth album, Solace and the Vices, was released in one half, the Vices half, on August 8th, with the Solace half to conclude this double album coming up soon on October 2nd. So this is the review of the first part that's out now. I'm getting to this a little bit late. I had kind of missed the release, honestly, because if you go on like Spotify, like digital streaming platforms, all these songs were put out originally as like singles, so it wasn't clear that this was supposed to be like a part one of an album in any stretch. Now you can actually find it in that way, so kind of missed the release on this, but nonetheless, Bryson Tiller, he's back after releasing his self-titled album just last year, so he's definitely a lot more present than he had been, I think, in the previous 10 years where he hadn't been releasing all too much. But this is certainly interesting that he's releasing a double album. Specifically, The Vices is a hip-hop focused project, and Solace is supposed to be a more traditional Bryson Tiller R&B project. So we'll see how that goes. Bryson, of course, has thrown other ideas out there in the past, like this project that he's put down called Serenity. He says he might go back to that in the future, but either way, Bryson Tiller decided to make this hip-hop album, The Vices, in large part due to the success of Whatever She Wants last year, which was a pretty big hit for him. You know, Bryson Tiller, not known to be a, traditional rapper. Of course, the Trap Soul brand had a ton of hip hop to it, but also still very much R&B, and that specific Bryson Tiller flavor is the reason why he got so popular and remains so to this day, 10 years after Trap Soul. That being said, I think The Vices is fine. There's definitely some cool hip-hop stuff that Bryson can do, but I do find some of his straight-up rapping to just be a little bit okay. I think sometimes he's just a little bit flat. I think the bars are just a little bit sparse. It's cliche to say you miss Bryson Tiller when he does Trap Soul, but that was a unique blend. He's openly expressed frustration with people always going back to that and how that's something that's in the past, especially post the Anniversary album. I understand where he's at, but that's just how I feel. This is cool. I enjoy this. I think I like The Vices better than a few past Bryson projects, but we're still a long way off the core appeal of 10 years ago. Also, we have a lot of tracks here, about 30 minutes in length, pretty quick. I think the first song, On My Way, is an example of this is maybe the ceiling of Bryson as a rapper, right? Because it's this super quick flow. But I do find the delivery kind of flat. It's clear this is not his main mode. The beat also is a bit sparse, not really doing him any favors. First Place, though, the next song, I think this is perhaps the highlight. I think this, with that bass drum reminiscent of old Bryson to me. I like that song a lot. Cut Ties with Boss Man D-Lo, this is, I think, a good example of Bryson Tiller kind of doing both, going in between. Despite this being the rap half, there's still plenty of Bryson singing on The Vices. There's still plenty of his, normal R&B stuff here. I think Cut Ties has a really nice chorus. Minnie Kelly, this is just Bryson straight up rapping, but has these very jazzy strings, which are a great fit for the Rick Ross feature. Just so nice to hear from him. I think that song's quite cool. More Than Money, I think this one's all right. I enjoy the hi-hats on that beat there. Burnout featuring Bun B, I enjoy Bryson using the pitch down voice on top of those bass hits. Sounds pretty cool. The last track, Finished, you got these traditional trap drums, very Atlanta. Pretty hard for Bryson. I like that flow switch up he does with the second verse. So I don't think there's anything super exciting here. I think that's just kind of my biggest note with it, where it's this is cool, but I was never someone who really gravitated towards Whatever She Wants all that much. Of course, that's a song with 400 million plus streams on Spotify. People like the track, but to me, Bryson doing hip hop, to me, I always go back to a song like Rambo or 502 Come Up off Trap Soul, right? Sorry Not Sorry, right? That 3-track run on that album, I just can't help but want to get that every time. And it's not fair to react that way. So like I said, I think there's some cool stuff here. I think First Time in particular is probably First Place. I think that's the best song here. But let me know, what did you think of Bryson Tiller's Devices? Where are you at with Bryson in terms of his place between R&B and hip-hop? How are you feeling about it? Let me know. Are you excited for Solace coming in October? And for more music reviews, more rap reviews, subscribe. And I'll see you next time. What's up? Welcome back to Nostalgia. Dave here with a review of Kaytranada's 4th album, Ain't No Damn Way. I'm getting to this a little bit late. This came out on August 15th. And, Kaytranada back again pretty soon. His last album, Timeless, came out last year, and that was a very different album from what Ain't No Damn Way is. In fact, Timeless had tons of features, had a lot to it. It was an album that I was pretty up and down on overall. Ain't No Damn Way is kind of the polar opposite in any respect. This is the first Kaytranada album that doesn't have any original guest features on it. It's a largely instrumental album. And I think that speaks to his confidence coming into his sound. Of course, being a really, I think, intriguing and celebrated electronic music artist for, 12 years at this point? The internet fame started in the early 2010s. Kaytranada has really reached the pinnacle now where he is I think, really respected figure and original voice still, in the scene. And he doesn't make the most commercial music. I very much think about him in terms of where he stands, in terms of critical reception and just general thinking about electronic music. I put Kaytranada next to Jamie XX and Fred again. I think you talk about the people you're most excited about. He's one of those guys. Kaytranada's 4th album, Ain't No Damn Way, being largely instrumental, having no original guest features, it's definitely nice to hear something that's a bit smoother, a bit more straightforward than his last project. While the album is largely quite lively in tempo the entire time, I do find it a bit lower stakes overall, but it's still very enjoyable. These are just kind of simpler songs, at least on their surface for Kaytranada standards. That being said, there's still a lot of depth, a lot of layering to his production, to his styling. I think the percussion that you hear across Ain't No Damn Way is probably the most appealing aspect of all of these beats. I get a vaguely science fiction vibe from these songs as well, which is super cool. Kaytranada himself said this album is strictly for workouts, dancing, and for studying for people that love beats. I think that's honestly kind of aptly put. This is, I think, just fun vibes, and when it's Kaytranada dictating what those vibes are, there's still a lot to really recommend and drill down and listen to. My favorite song on Ain't No Damn Way is actually track 1, Space Invader, which has this nice Kellis sample, Easy Come, Easy Go. I think this song has a super cool groove, really like that drum rhythm. Subtle vocals here and there, then about a minute in, there's a little bit of a switch up. Those vocals become more pronounced, and then the song kind of drops a bit more bass drum as you return back to the original loop. Cool song. I think overall, you're gonna kind of be in the same range on a lot of these songs where the core loop of the track is largely consistent throughout most of the songs. There's not any crazy swings on this project. Championship is in kind of a similar range of Space Invader, just a bit subtler. Home, this one actually kind of starts out with some dull synths for me, honestly, but then you get a lot of percussion, which I think really livens it up. Target Joint, kind of a bit of a swing vibe to it. Things is a highlight for me. The beats are definitely more glitchy in terms of how it feels. Can be a bit grating, I guess, but it definitely stood out to me as something that was a lot different from the rest of the project. Backstab's definitely a downshift here, but some cool percussion going on once again. I think Good Luck, this one's just fine, probably my least favorite of everything here. Shine Your Light for me, really propulsive tempo. I think that one's pretty cool. Goodbye Bitch, snaps, horns, really nice. And then the last track, Do It Again, featuring TLC via a Let's Do It Again TLC sample, of course. Very cool, very nice use of the sample and those TLC vocals specifically. I think the strings here are very serene. And yeah, I think this is definitely something that's a lot easier to just kind of put on, as Kaytranada said, his intentions for it. It's a lot different than Timeless. I think Timeless just had a lot of guests that kind of made or broke a lot of the songs. Like I felt that way about Kaytranada's collab album with Amine. Like I thought Kaytranada's production was largely pretty good on Kaytranada, but I didn't love a lot of the Amine features. And that's coming from an Amine fan. And like that's kind of where the album landed for me, So Kaytranada eliminating features from this and just having some samples still around seemed to work out, because then he actually gets to be the star of the music. So yeah, shout out Kaytranada. Fourth album, Ain't No Damn Way. Pretty good. Let me know how you felt about it. And for more music reviews, subscribe. And I'll see you next time. What's up, welcome back to Nostalgia. Dave here with a review of the Chinese historical drama film Dead to Rights. This film came out back in China towards the end of July and has been a massive hit, grossing about 350 million so far, almost exclusively, of course, in China. And this film, in fact, is the follow-up film from director Shen Oh. Shen Oh, 2 years ago, directed No More Bets, a movie I liked quite a bit and have previously reviewed. Check that out if you missed it. Now he's back with Dead to Rights, and this film is a much more ambitious film because it's an historical drama film specifically set during World War II, specifically in 1937, Nanjing, during the Nanjing Massacre, which is incredibly dark and serious subject matter to portray on screen. I, of course, like to try and see some of the big Chinese blockbusters that do get a limited release here in the States. I'm lucky enough to live in an area where any of those movies that do get a small release will be playing by me. Of course, separate from that would be something like Ne Zha 2, which is set ungodly amount of records, the highest grossing movie of the year thus far. That got a pretty substantially large release here in the States, a few months ago, and actually just got a English language release as well. I think that's perhaps the first of its kind in terms of a Chinese film being dubbed in English and re-released a second time here, right? It's definitely a sign of where things are. And the Nanjing Massacre, like that's been portrayed a few times in some films, but I don't think it's ever been portrayed at like a budget level, at a just a filmmaking, style the way it has with this new film here. And while the characters portrayed in this film and the general story you're seeing is fictional regarding a group of civilians surviving the massacre in and around a photo studio, it is tangentially related to some things that did happen during the massacre. The star of the film is Lu Haran, who's a pretty big Chinese actor from the Detective Chinatown films. But yeah, this is a movie that I thought was really well done. The Chinese blockbuster film Dead to Rights is a very successful historical drama film portraying the Nanjing Massacre in 1937 as hundreds of thousands of Chinese civilians and non-combatants were killed by the Japanese army during the early years of World War II. This is incredibly heavy and sensitive subject matter that is still a big deal to this day, and this film does not shy away from showing the tragedy, the savagery that was on display. This movie is graphic, this movie is dark, this movie is bleak. There's a lot of death to this movie, and it's a tough sit, but I think it's a very well done film. It's not super sensationalized or anything like that. You get wrapped up with this ensemble of characters and their relationships with each other as they have different means of trying to survive this horror that they find themselves in. And despite being a very long movie at 2.5 hours long, the tension is really built up, and I think the movie has a really nice plotting to it. The production design is also quite impressive, whether it's the photo studio sets or other locations in the destroyed city. It's a really engaging film. This is something, the Nanjing Massacre, the rape of Nanking, this is something that like I learned about, growing up, learning about history, but, like learning about World War II, in the States, even as like someone who, has a history degree now as well. It's definitely something that you don't spend too much time on, just because obviously we're going to learn about the war from the United States perspective. So a lot of stuff that happened in the 30s before the US was involved, you kind of learn about like the headlines, but you don't really drill down too much. So this is something that like obviously I knew was like super tragic, and there was so much death and all that, but that's like kind of all I knew about it. I didn't really know too much more. But this film I think does a really good job of showing you exactly what was going on, whether you had any knowledge going in or not, right? I mean, widespread rape, widespread murder and torture, men, women, children, young, old, didn't matter, right? I mean, this is war crimes galore. That's what was going on over a few weeks, few months, depending on when exactly that period was. And I think the film does a really good job of kind of showing you that early despair as you watch the city fall, which I think is really impressively filmed. And then actually even getting like that mindset, right, of how could the Japanese lose? Like that was a line said a few times in this film, but like the seemingly inescapable power and strength of the Japanese army. It's really communicated well, I think, in this this film. It's depicting the stages of the second Sino-Japanese War, right? So I think the backdrop, the history is like really well in there, but man, like it's a character film at the end of the day. And like, yes, does it get a bit melodramatic? Does it get a bit, over the top, I guess, with some of those swells? Sure. But I think you're kind of cool with it, right? Because you're spending so much time with these characters and you're like on pins and needles, seeing if they're going to make it out. And as you watch the film, you have a sense that most, if not all, of the people you're watching are not going to make it out, just because of how the odds are stacked against them. And I won't spoil exactly who lives or who dies with that, but I think things are paid off and done quite well. And the concept of, loyalty to the state versus loyalty to yourself and your family, surviving by any means necessary, what it means to sacrifice. A lot of those nuances and gray areas are a big part of this film as well. I like their lead, A-Chang, played by Lou Haran, just because he's this guy who is a postman, a mail carrier who can't escape the impending, invasion. And by pure luck and happenstance, able to survive by being mistaken for someone who works at the photo studio. And he gets to survive by developing photos for the young Japanese Ito. He's like a lieutenant of some kind, but he's a photographer for the army, coming from money, young, trying to get his respect in his own way, right? And he doesn't actually know how to develop the photos he's taking. And of course, we meet a bunch of other characters. A-Chang meets this family that actually owned the photo studio, hiding out in their cellar. And that's how he learns to develop photos. Of course, he didn't have those skills himself. I think all of that's like really good. It's kind of like classic like movie trope in terms of like learning that to keep the momentum. But the movie, like every few times in each act, it's like it's gonna really hit you over the head with like, no, things are super bad. Like you're not getting out of this. Like you just watch a lot of like bad things happen. Like it's just they're not gonna hide it from you. I think that's smart. Like the movie shouldn't like shy away from the brutality. I didn't have a problem with that. I will say towards the end there is a situation where we lose two characters we knew, and that is a particularly gutting thing because of how the movie's setting you up with those characters, and then to see them not survive was, I think, particularly gutting and well done. Obviously, with Chinese films, you talk about sometimes like the influence of like, overtly patriotic like sentimentality and things like that. We talk about that a lot with any kind of Chinese film that has any kind of message, right? And I've reviewed a bunch of them. And I think with this one, like, yes, like there's definitely like a patriotic lean towards the end, especially when like we see the Nanjing War Crimes Tribunal, right? Where we watch the generals in charge of this, onslaught get killed for their, what they're responsible for. It makes sense that you see something like that. I will say though, I think the movie doesn't really portray the Japanese people as like entirely one note. Like obviously they're portrayed as villains because in the situation they were villains. But I think the Ito character and like his lean between like being a like leader and master of these like subservient Chinese people working for him, but also trying to thread the needle with the chain of command at the army that doesn't really respect him. I think that's done pretty well. It's definitely one of those movies that like you're going to watch it once, you don't want to watch it a second time. But I thought the plotting was pretty good, and maybe you get a little numb, you're a little desensitized to watching all these bad things happen a lot. But the various characters that you meet, I think all of them serve a pretty important purpose for the most part. And I just really like the different perspectives you're kind of seeing in this found family out of survival need, that we spend all our time with in the film. And in theory, this could be a foreign film that would travel well. Obviously it's not for everyone given all the violence, but I think it's a pretty universal story to watch. So I'm not expecting this to be a massive hit. It's just been in limited release here in the States for a few weeks. I think that's where it'll end. But nonetheless, I really recommend the film. I think where the film starts to like really sing and like take it up a notch is where you see all these, civilians that we know, and they've been developing all these photos from Ito, and a lot of his photos are of blatant war crimes, severed heads and like dead people and people literally being stabbed and all kinds of things that are not pleasant, right? And they understand that they can use these negatives of these photos and they can tell the story of what's happened here to make sure people understand. And obviously that didn't actually happen this way as the movie portrays, but that is a thing that happened with people, smuggling out negatives from this massacre to show the world what had happened. And I think once that becomes a motivation for the characters to stick it out and develop these photos for the greater good, I think that's what the movie like really picks it up. And on the other side of things, the Japanese side with Ito, the concept of propaganda and how best to wield it is also, I think, portrayed pretty well as well. So yeah, Dead to Rights, I like the movie quite a bit. Not for everyone, but I really recommend it. Let me know, though, what did you think of the film if you've seen it? What did you like most about it? And for more movie reviews, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. What's up? Welcome back to Nostalgia. Dave here with a review of The Roses, the new black comedy film from Jay Roach, starring Benedict Cumberbatch and Olivia Colman. This film is a remake of the 1989 film The War of the Roses, starring Michael Douglas and Kathleen Turner, which of course was adapted from a novel of the same name from 1981. And this film, from Searchlight Pictures, Jay Roach directing his first film since Bombshell back in 2019. Tony McNamara with the screenplay, of course, previously worked with Olivia Colman, with, of course, The Favorite. He also wrote Poor Things recently. A lot of talent, a lot of prestige around the film. Some appealing supporting actors involved: Andy Samberg, Kate McKinnon, Allison Janney. Despite a lot of appealing aspects and a lot of promise, The Roses remake film is less than the sum of its parts. This movie is not consistently funny enough. It is not engaging enough dramatically to really work all the way. It just is not a consistent enough movie, and it gets really stuck in the mud in the middle to the point where you're not really rooting for anyone after a while, but the movie takes these wild swings in terms of who you're supposed to be rooting for and feeling for at that moment, but it's really hard to connect with any of the characters. And after a while, the dialogue between Olivia Colman and Benedict Cumberbatch gets increasingly hard to sit with. I still laughed at times, I just didn't laugh enough, and I feel like this movie just tried to have it both ways most of the time. And I think the movie starts off somewhat promisingly, right? You have this couple that has a meet cute that starts off the movie, a decade in the past, where Olivia Colman is this chef, Benedict Cumberbatch is this rising architect. They immediately hit it off and get married. And then we jump ahead 10 years to their life with their young children in Mendocino, California. And once again, their lives are kind of the same. Benedict Cumberbatch's Theo is about to open this museum that he designed with a very unique, specific architectural flair that he has a lot of passion for. And Olivia Colman's Ivy continues to be a cook, but largely is the child raiser at the time. And the movie, of course, shifts where disaster strikes and Theo is ruined effectively and embarrassed in the community when his building gets destroyed in a storm. And around that same time, Ivy's restaurant and culinary abilities really takes off, and she becomes a rising and hot new chef on the food scene in the West Coast. And that, of course, becomes our conflict. And one thing that's nice about this film as a remake is that Cumberbatch and Olivia Colman are both English, and they're playing British people in the movie, and that's obviously a change from the first film. And you get, I think, some amusing British humor for sure. Like Tony McNamara definitely knows how to write dialogue for Olivia Colman. I don't have a problem with most of the dialogue necessarily. I just have a general issue with like where the script takes us, because I think we spend so much time belaboring the strained relationship between Ivy and Theo and their inability to communicate, their inability to connect with each other and they both have their own self-interest and their own ego in different respects. And you're seeing it, and you're just kind of watching a car crash in slow motion. And I wish the movie would take less time to get to what honestly it advertises in most of its trailer, which is when they finally really come at odds and they have like this fight and they're trying to win the divorce settlement over the other. That is really not much of the movie at all. That's like the last 15, 20 minutes, you know? And I think we just spend a lot of time spinning our wheels in that middle section. You know, the kids are largely written out of the story after a while. I guess it's pretty amusing how quickly they become like super mature 13-year-olds in the story. Allison Janney, literally in the movie for one scene, didn't expect that. Although that is a nice scene, a memorable scene, performance from her that she's in. Nakuti Gatwa, honestly, as the one of the waiters working for Ivy at her new restaurant, he is actually great. Honestly, I loved his energy. I loved his personality. I would have loved more of him, honestly. I think it's probably my favorite performance. You know, I think Cumberbatch and Coleman are both pretty good. I think Coleman's better, but it's just like, God, they're playing just despicable characters, both of them, and why they're despicable is, again, different. And I think that contrast is supposed to be the appeal of the film, but I think it's just very inconsistent as it moves along. And a lot of the other supporting characters don't make a huge impression. Andy Samberg, Kate McKinnon, a lot of stuff that's supposed to be played for laughs but isn't super funny. Yeah, I thought this film was honestly just kind of fine, but you can kind of tell, like, I think Searchlight knew this wasn't as good as they were hoping it to be. That's why it's a Labor Day release and not a festival premiere leading into a more traditional fall release. Like, they know this is not going to be an awards movie. It's just not good enough. So win some, you lose some. You know, Tony McNamara after The Favorite and Poor Things. I don't think this script will be super memorable from him, although some good dialogue, I suppose. And then Jay Roach, I mean, to have this be your first film since Bombshell, which Bombshell was fine, but I think got some awards recognition, which made some sense. 6 years later, and this is what you churned out. Not the best comeback. Let me know, though, what you think of The Roses. How'd you feel about the movie? And for more movie reviews, subscribe. And I'll see you next time. What's up? Welcome back to Nostalgia. Dave here with a review of Caught Stealing, the new crime thriller film from Darren Aronofsky, starring Austin Butler. This is Aronofsky's first film in 3 years since The Whale, which, of course, was a small film that reached big highs because, of course, Brendan Fraser won his first Oscar for his role in that movie. And that was, you know, the comeback film for Aronofsky post all the hoopla regarding Mother from 2017. And Caught Stealing, here it is, another movie that's a bit more traditional, a bit more simple and less involved than Aronofsky's earlier work, such as Black Swan, which recently was re-released for its 15th anniversary just a few weeks ago. The appeal of Caught Stealing is not that Darren Aronofsky is behind the camera. It's pretty traditional crime thriller in that regard. The appeal here is, of course, Austin Butler's star turn. He carries every scene of this 1998 New York City set thriller, and his charisma in playing a notably non-badass character. He is not playing Fade Routha again. He's playing a normal dude who has some demons and then finds himself in a very troubling situation regarding organized crime. Butler carries this film with his presence, his charisma, and the plot moves so quickly and has a really fun ensemble to it. It's a really nice, good time. I think this is a really well set New York City thriller. The 90s are well realized here. There's some subversive action, a lot of humor that lands quite well. Caught Stealing might not surprise you at too many turns, but it's just a really enjoyable ride to be on. I think right off the bat, you get some fun chemistry between Butler and Zoe Kravitz, who plays his paramedic girlfriend. But we very quickly get to meet this whole laundry list of characters. Butler's character, Hank, his neighbor, is played by Matt Smith, who plays this English punk who happens to be involved in organized crime as a drug dealer. And before we know it, we meet two Russian mobsters who are quite aggressive and violent. We meet police officer played by Regina King. We meet two Hasidic Jew mobsters played by Vincent D'Onofrio and Liev Schreiber. Really funny small roles from Bad Bunny and Action Bronson. This movie being set in 98, I think, makes a big difference, right? I mean, they do a great job of grounding that, right? You see the World Trade Center several times, but the fact that this is like a no cell phone story, They're using payphones. There's a lot of word of mouth, a lot of huge bar culture. Like if it's dated in the best way. And I mean, this is a common talking point, right? That cell phones ruin movies, but not having cell phones makes this movie so much more fun and a lot more plausible for that matter as well, because this is a film with a ton of plot, covers a lot of ground, a lot of, outlandish things happen, but you're kind of just on for the ride. Like, it's all pretty believable. And we spend a lot of time going all around New York, right? We find ourselves in Flushing, we go to Coney Island, we're all over the place. I really think, though, just all the goons are just really well realized as characters and foes for Hank to, elude and not be killed by. The Russians, the shorter one, Microbe, who's just so aggro and so needlessly violent, makes a big impression early on. Liev Schreiber and Vincent D'Onofrio, though, I think they kind of steal the show once they show up. And like Bad Bunny initially steals the show. I think his performance was a real firecracker. Even Action Bronson only has a handful of lines, has a lot of presence too, fits right in as this townie at the bar. But once you meet the two Jewish guys, I mean, God, I think D'Onofrio and Schreiber, they have the comedic timing super down between each other. They have great chemistry. I think their general role in the story is pretty fun. And yes, does the movie like maybe have a bit of a neat conclusion? Like, it kind of gets wrapped up and, our hands are wiped clean by the end as a lot of plot gets progressed. Sure. But I do think like the general like pulse of the storytelling was just a lot of fun. And like I said before, like, this doesn't really strike you as something specific to Darren Aronofsky, right? Requiem for a Dream, this is not. But as a vehicle for Austin Butler, whose star, of course, continues to rapidly rise, I think it's a successful turn from him. And it doesn't look like this movie's going to do too well at the box office, so they're not the best notch in the belt for Butler's, star ability to open a film. It doesn't seem like there's just enough buzz behind the film coming out on Labor Day weekend, despite a pretty robust press tour from Butler and Kravitz. Nonetheless, I think it's a movie that will do well over time as people find it, just because I think it's just broadly pretty crowd pleasing, and the humor, just there's enough of it there that lands. Also, I think really nice to have a meaty role from Regina King again. Like, she's had a lot of supporting work lately, but I think this is one of the biggest roles in something high profile that she's done in a few years, which I quite enjoyed from her. I think Hank, his personal demons and his backstory, I think that's all kind of weaved in pretty well in terms of why he's alcoholic, his relationship with baseball, his desire to always call his mom and talk about the Giants as this California boy living in New York City. I think all that's portrayed pretty well, and you understand why Hank is fueled to act the way he does and survive. I think the character works pretty well. But yeah, let me know, what did you think of Caught Stealing? Did you enjoy the film as much as I did? Let me know. And for more movie reviews, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. What's up? Welcome back to Nostalgia. Dave here with the review of Highest to Lowest, the new film from Spike Lee, his first film in 5 years since Defy Bloods came out on Netflix in the middle of the pandemic in 2020. Highest to Lowest, of course, is a remake of Akira Kurosawa's classic from 1963, High and Low, substituting out Toshiro Mifune, adding in Denzel Washington, taking Kurosawa's post-war meditation and replacing it with a modern-day story set in New York City. Of course, the world of Kurosawa adaptation and homage is very storied, and frankly, this is the second time that Spike has directly adapted a Asian film classic. Of course, let's not forget that he did his attempt at Park Chan-wook's Old Boy, about 10 years ago, which didn't go super well. That being said, Highest to Lowest is here after premiering at Cannes, and this is an A24 film in association with Apple. Unfortunately, it's not getting a full theatrical release the way, say, F1, the movie, did. This is just going to be in select theaters for a few weeks, and then will be available on Apple TV Plus on September 5th, which is where I imagine most people will end up watching the movie. And I guess that's a bit disappointing. I think this is a film that has certainly some crowd-pleasing moments, and I think Denzel's popularity could have propelled this movie to a decent box office, all things considered, but alas, that's not really going to come out. And frankly, A24 might not even tell us how the box office did. Highest to Lowest is a largely successful adaptation of Akira Kurosawa's classic. Adapting Kurosawa is no small task, and of course a direct adaptation is going to invite a lot of comparison. There's a lot of things that Highest to Lowest doesn't really match up against its predecessor. That being said, Denzel Washington's central performance is very, very strong. One of his most charismatic central performances in a very long time. And there's just enough comment on, modern society throughout this movie to make it pretty compelling. A lot of the sequences that are replicated in this movie I find a bit inferior, but when Highest to Lowest changes things and we get something new, like a sequence in a music studio at the end of the film, that's where this movie really sings and the creativity really shines. Overall, though, I think it's still really entertaining. And the central premise of High and Low is still very applicable to a modern day story. So overall, I really enjoyed the movie. It's tough to do the comparisons, and part of it's not fair, but also part of it is inevitable. You think about High and Low, that is the second to last movie Toshiro Mifune made with Akira Kurosawa, his 15th of 16 collaborations. So that's a film that honestly has such a meta context to it. The central character Mifune plays, Gando, a lot of the things his character is musing about and his, building his legacy, or having built his legacy and reflecting on what he's done and what kind of person he is. And the way that movie ends with a kind of nebulous, not satisfactory conclusion for its characters. There's no resolution to the end of High and Low, right? A lot of that's like super meta and applicable to like Mifune and Kurosawa's thoughts on their career and what they've done after making all these samurai movies. And in this case, I don't think this movie's trying to do nearly the same. Of course, Denzel has a storied history with Spike Lee. That's obvious. However, there is something to be said for, I think, there's a switch up they do, right? Rather than being a very successful shoe executive like Gando was, in this case, you have Denzel's character, David King, aka King David, as the New York press proclaimed him. And he's basically like a substitute for like a Dame Dash or Dr. Dre at Aftermath, a really successful music label figure, hip-hop label figure who made his legend, won his Grammys largely in the 2000s, the pre-streaming age, and is now trying to grapple with maintaining his relevance and maintaining his control on art and his finger on the pulse as the music discovery ecosystem has changed, grappling with his advancing age, what he wants his legacy to be. I think it's a really smart way to like redo this premise in modern times, and Denzel as a label exec is a lot of fun. I think when you do get brief moments of that, it's enjoyable. I could have used more, frankly, right? There's nods to like AI in music, and there's nods to trying to listen through all the noise with social media and the attention economy we have today, and how all that works. And a change they do with this story is King David's son is aged up. He's like a senior in high school versus the kids in High and Low are like elementary school age and thus don't really have much to their character. But King's son, has his own thoughts and has his own more of a relationship, with his father. And I think that comes across maybe in a bit of a heavy-handed way when there's some emotional friction between them, but overall I think it's a nice change. I think the key change with this movie, probably the biggest change of them all, frankly, besides obvious like modernizing of the story, but the big change here is that like structurally the second half or the last third of Highest to Lowest is not like High and Low, in the sense that High and Low becomes a bit of a police procedural, right? And Mifune is almost like to the side and out of frame for a lot of the storytelling post the exchange of the money and whatnot. That's really just not the case at all. If you think back on High and Low, the police characters and lead detective have like a really big importance to the story, and they're real like a nice piece of the ensemble. And then they carry the story once it goes down that path. That's not really the case with the cops this time around. I mean, they're in the movie plenty, but Denzel as King is the central character the entire time still. And of course, more Denzel, always good. But I did really like how the cops were in the OG. And the other big change, in High and Low, Gando's chauffeur, whose of course son gets kidnapped by mistake, that character, Aoki, is like a subservient, worker on behalf of Gondo. There's not really much of a rapport between them. He's just someone who works for him. Versus in Highest to Lowest, yes, it's still King's chauffeur, but he's played by Jeffrey Wright, big art, stature increase for the actor. And also the character has much more of like a years of history and friendly dynamic and found family between them. So his pain, his emotion, his desire to get his son back is a bit stronger, and there's more to that. That being said, I didn't think the decision, like the change, right, where King decides to pay the ransom after originally being steadfast and not wanting to do it, it came across as being a bit more abrupt in Highest to Lowest. He's kind of has the terse convo with his son. Then he's kind of in his office, getting a bit emotional, talking to the various black iconography he has on display: Aretha Franklin, James Brown, Jimi Hendrix, etc. And he just kind of comes to the conclusion that he's going to pay the ransom for his friend's kid. And I think they just pay that off a lot better in High and Low. It just takes more time to get there. Gondo's grappling with what it means to pay that and sacrifice his livelihood and his plans for his career in the process. Like, I think all of that is just a bit stronger, a bit tighter in High and Low. And of course, in both movies, you get the exchange of the money. I think the original train sequence is still very memorable, still really works a lot. And it felt, it contributed to the lead up to that police procedural section of the film, because it really felt like the kidnapper had everyone dead to rights and had it all planned out, telling them what going to the bathroom window that you could actually open and sticking the money through the suitcase. And it was a thin suitcase that he asked for so it could fit through the window, and in between stops so they couldn't get off when they saw them on foot, right? I think that sequence really works. This time around, obviously, it's a change. It's now the subway going from Manhattan to the Bronx or Brooklyn to the Bronx, whatever it was. There's I think there's kind of an abruptness to it. Like an e-brake is pulled, making King drop his backpack of money very conveniently into a moped guy underneath the tracks. Like, that felt really like Hail Mary to me, compared to how buttoned up and foolproof the plan was in the original. I just didn't like how convenient it was, although it does lead to, I think, a nice little kind of moped exchange where they get away successfully. I think a really amusing 2-layer bit that's going on in Highest to Lowest. One of the cops is played by Dean Winters, who of course has a very successful career largely on television. However, recently he's probably most famous for being the Allstate Mayhem Like Me narrator / character throughout all those commercials, right? So just seeing him be kind of a similar energy in Highest to Lowest as one of the cops, by the most antagonistic of the group, that was kind of a fun note for the audience. But then later on, there's a great bit with when Jeffrey Wright calls up the hood to figure out where the kidnapper is. Once they get some clues figured out, King is admonishing him, or surprised that Jeffrey Wright's packing some handguns. And when he gets asked what it is, he says, "This is insurance. This is Jake from State Farm," which got a huge laugh in the theater. And then they, I think a little later on, or is it in the exact same scene, Jake from State Farm handgun gets handed to Denzel, and then Jeffrey Wright's character pulls out another bigger gun, like a Magnum almost, and then King's like, "What is that?" And he's like, "This is mayhem." Really unexpected insurance commercial humor in Highest to Lowest, but it got a great laugh, I gotta say. One note that I think it was just kind of unintended piece of editing, but when watching Highest to Lowest, there's the realization that the kidnapper is in fact this aspiring rapper, Young Felon, played of course by A$AP Rocky in the movie. You know, Jeffrey Wright, who is a guy who's out on parole, Paul is his name, Paul is out on parole, but still has connection to, you know, his past life. And he like texts someone like Young Felon's like Apple Music profile or something. And the scene, the frame is so quick. My theater reacted with like an oh shit, like mind blown type reaction, because it was suggesting that like Paul was somehow in on the events, and like he was like a collaborator with Young Felon in arranged kidnapping. And of course that's not true at all. But like that was the reaction people had in my theater. And when I saw that, I was like, wait, this would be a really big change if like Aoki in High and Low actually was in cahoots with the kidnapper, right? It's a big change to how the story goes. That's not what happened, but the editing and the quick cut of it really suggested to my theater that that's what happened. If you saw the movie with anyone or just yourself, let me know if you had a similar experience with that, because that was 100% how it went when I saw it. But of course, that's not the case. A$AP Rocky, though, got to give it to him. You know, on one hand, I'm incredibly frustrated that he continues to not release new music. How many delays have we had for this latest album, Don't Be Dumb? A dumb amount. Obviously, he's gotten through the other side of the A$AP Bari assault trial. I want this new album to come out. The last one came out in May 2018. That's a ridiculous wait. He's had multiple children with Rihanna. We're happy for him. These children are not newborns anymore because it's been that long that I could really use a new album. And it's frustrating to see him spending more of that time acting instead. You know, obviously we know he's very involved with fashion, seemingly increasingly becoming an actor. He has another movie coming out, A24, the Rose Byrne film, later this fall. He's also in that. I could really use that album from Rocky. And I think the original song that he did for Highest to Lowest, Back to the Front, I think it's called, that's actually pretty good. I think his verses are really fun on that. And I got to admit, though, he's really pretty good in Highest to Lowest. You know, is it asking too much of him to play aspiring rapper? Of course not. But I think his charisma works really well. He's able to hold his own against Denzel in the few scenes they share. And as I mentioned in the beginning, that music studio scene where they almost like rap at each other and this like tit for tat, and like the screenplay like really like elevates for a second. Like it's a classic like Spike flair, that moment. And I thought it was really cool. And shout out Rocky for, I think, holding his own in the movie and fit right in for the character. That being said, I did not love the actual ending of the movie. Like that would have been a good ending, right? But the actual ending, where they redo the High and Low ending, where Gondo goes to prison to see the dude, the kidnapper, and the kidnapper proves to just kind of be a sociopath, and there's no resolution or satisfaction in that conversation. And that basically kind of happens again, except it's just not as effective. You know, you have Young Felon going incredibly viral as a result of the publicity of the events of the film, and then he offers to King to to sign him. Everyone else wants to sign him, but no, he wants to sign with King, and King isn't interested, right? And like, cool idea, cool premise to have that be like this possibility, I guess, for the movie to go, but I don't know, it just felt like a lesser version. And then on top of that, you get this like epilogue scene where King and his wife and his son are like listening to a live performance from this new artist who they might end up signing, and it's kind of like an Alicia Keys, kind of torch singer type singer in their house. And it's like, that also just felt super like unnecessary as like an actual ending of the movie. Like they had to like really button it up. I'm not sure like where that came from in the script, but didn't need that personally. So I didn't love how the film ended. I think there was a few moments where I was expecting the film to cut out and like fade to black, like show us directed by Spike Lee or something. And I would have been like super satisfied with that as a cut point, but like it just kind of kept going and got a little long in the tooth. You know, much like High and Low, the wife character, nothing too much going on. I guess the wife this time around, played by Ilfench Hadera, who actually has some previous credits from Spike movies. I think she's fine. You know, she has a little bit more to say, and as opposed to high and low, but nothing too crazy. But yeah, overall, enjoyed the movie. I think it's a successful adaptation. I mean, this is leagues better than like how his Spike Lee's Old Boy went compared to Park Chan-wook's Old Boy, right? Like we're in a different ballpark. And yes, High and Low is a stone cold classic. Like it's a 5-star movie. Like one of the most celebrated films in Kurosawa's filmography. Like Highs to Lows isn't going to be one of those for Spike, but still pretty good. And unfortunately, it was a 5-year wait between movies, right? You know, he was pretty active the last handful of years, right? Black Klansman was just 2 years before Da 5 Bloods. I love the Da 5 Bloods. Amazing Chadwick supporting performance, you know. Last one of our last gasps of Jonathan Majors before all that went to zero. So hopefully Spike, keeps going. You know, he's in his 60s now. He's not super young, but also, I mean, shit, Denzel, Gladiator 2 steals the movie last fall, right? Supporting role. Really great leading performance here again. Denzel still got it, unsurprisingly. But, you know, for someone who's slowed down a little bit, done a little bit more theater, less film, it's cool to see, like, I think this 1-2 punch for his late career, the way it's gone. So, really good. Overall, I'm so satisfied with it. Let me know what you think about it. What you think about it as an adaptation? How did you feel about the quick cut I mentioned? Did that confuse you the way it confused my audience? Let me know. And for more movie reviews, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. All right, that's going to do for the pod this week. No pod next week. I'll be catching up on some stuff that I'm going to be missing while I'm away, such as the new Sabrina Carpenter album, new Joey Badass album, a bunch of other K-pop albums, aespa, Chaeyoung from Twice, Treasure, HBO's Task with Mark Ruffalo will be kicking off. I'm sure some other stuff will pop up. So that'll be a big megapod in 2 weeks' time. So make sure you subscribe. youtube.com/nostalgiapod. linktree.com/nostalgiapod. See links below. Hit the Best of 2025 Spotify playlist linked below. Let me know it's good. And I'll see you in 2 weeks.